Hey, do I sound especially elated?
I guess so.
Feeling elation. Oh, Dave's joining.
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, Dave, how you doing?
Doing all right, guys.
Welcome to the Modern Digital Enterprise, the digital transformation podcast from Anexinet. I'm here with my co-host, Glenn Gruber.
Hey, I guess that was my cue to say hello.
That was the cue. Well done. And also today we're talking with David Mahoney. And David is an enterprise services architect at Anexinet who recently commented on the SolarWinds hack for CRN. And so Glenn and I thought it would be great to just bring him in to talk about the SolarWinds hack.
And what better day to have a conversation about, an attack by a foreign adversary on our IT infrastructure than on the day of Joseph Biden Jr.'s inauguration.
That's right. I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, well, you can edit that out if you want.
If I come up with something clever, I'll add it in and pretend that I'm clever enough to think of something. David, if you could just introduce yourself and say how you got to where you are in your digital journey with Anexinet.
Sure. Good afternoon, guys. I mean, as you said, I'm an enterprise services architect in the pre-sales department for infrastructure services for Anexinet. I've been doing information technology in some form or the other for about 20 years. Got about 10 years plus of professional IT management consulting experience. And a lot of that has been based around, infrastructure design, DevOps, and obviously cybersecurity is just a big thing in the world that we live in and continuing to grow in the marketplace given the current threat landscape. So obviously I took a particular interest in this and the set of circumstances around the Orion breach specifically.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Well, let's start at a very high level for those who haven't been following. First of all, why is it called the SolarWinds hack?
Because the attack vector actually came from SolarWinds Orion platform, right? So this was a SolarWinds Orion supply chain attack. So the attackers actually embedded malicious code inside of the Orion software, right, through the SolarWinds development process, which was then distributed to customers through a thought to be good update for SolarWinds Orion packages, which was then deployed through the customers unknowingly. And then it was allowed to, once executed, it actually called home and it essentially gave the attackers a backdoor into the customer's environments to be able to execute additional remote code and procedures.
So how is Orion supposed to work typically? What is it supposed to do?
I'm not completely familiar with all of SolarWinds platforms and packages. They've obviously, they've been a very big player in the network monitoring and ITSM management space for a long time. Orion is just one of the SolarWinds management modules for either monitoring or ITSM. I believe it's the monitoring collection platforms that's used for, agent-based IT server and network monitoring, I believe.
And so how are they able to get the malware into this update?
You don't want to speculate too much because you don't want to start throwing people under the bus and casting shade because these things spread like wildfire, right? They're very high profile. But at the end of the day, somehow, and I'm not sure if anyone is, at least it's not been released to the public that I'm aware of, there was malicious code that was injected into the development process that was then allowed to be packaged as part of an update and then pushed out to customers. And that's about the best that I can say at this point.
So we have these chickens here. I know this sounds ridiculous, but the chickens go back a long way. So to use a chicken analogy, it would be like if we gave our chickens food or antibiotics or something that was meant to help them, but it turned out there was poison in the food and it just wiped them out.
Correct. Yeah.
Particularly odious. I saw this thing. It said we're supposed to apparently take solace in the fact that only 18,000 of the 300,000 customers were affected.
Yeah, but look at who some of those 18,000 affected customers are, and I think that removes any kind of safe feeling that could be had from that metric. So
I mean,
I don't think that's a valid point.
I mean, just the number alone, 18,000 sounds like a monumental number.
Well, I mean, given the size of the world and the, the ubiquity of digital assets, right, and data and applications and what is networked and what is not networked in this day and age, I'm sure there is somebody out there who thinks that they're smart that says, oh, 18,000, that's not that many. Great. But let's look at the size and the reach and the pervasiveness of the customers that were infected. We're talking about federal agencies like the Department of Treasury and the DOJ, Microsoft, VMware. Do you know? I mean, I think Microsoft owns something like 80% of the virtualization market share in the world. So, do we all want to feel really comfortable that number is only 18,000? I know I sure don't.
Yeah, the Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of Energy, Homeland Security. That's what I saw. FireEye, Cisco Systems.
As long as it was nothing important.
Yeah.
With gigantic, sarcastic air quotes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Almost everything I say is surrounded by gigantic, sarcastic air quotes. But I think actually to underscore your point about how big of a deal that this was, I was reading another article that compared this to the Pearl Harbor of American IT, because this was such a significant breach, major impact here. Again, not trying to think about like casting aspersions or anything, but what are some of the common sense things that should now be on people's radar, even if they weren't directly going to be affected by this hack, but just, what should people be thinking about, and maybe what should they be doing differently than most people are today?
There's so much, right? Everybody is talking a good game about, you need to develop a cyber program, like the big guys, right? Because the big guys, they have all the money to spend to do all the things that they should be doing, and then they buy all the snazzy tools. But obviously that's not true, because look at these people that did get breached. These are the people that are supposed to have the cybersecurity council available and skills available to be able to prevent these things. And it didn't happen, right? It was not prevented. And the things specifically that are related to this, I mean, it runs the whole gambit. So secure DevOps being the number one, right? SolarWinds, if they had a potentially, and then none of this can be said for sure, obviously, because you don't know exactly how sneaky and malicious this attack was, or how well the code was hidden, or what the level of laboriousness would be involved to do maybe a manual review, if that's maybe the only way that SolarWinds could have caught this attack. So it's difficult to lay blame. That's not where this is coming from. So the tonality of this is more about putting in potentially mitigating controls to limit this kind of attack, not necessarily saying these things would have stopped it. I know I come off as very assertive. I don't want to misrepresent my facts. So I'm not saying this would have stopped it. I'm saying that these are things that you should be and could be doing to continue to prevent these kinds of things from happening, just to be clear. So number one is secure DevOps. Every piece of code that gets checked in before it gets executed in any kind of production environment should always go through a very rigorous set of static and dynamic testing. I firmly believe that there should be a QA process. It's difficult to quantify this, but I think that you should have a classification meter or metric of some kind for your software, depending on what its function is in the world and in business, in both contexts, to say, listen, based on what we do and what this is doing and the data flow and everything else, we are in risk level X, right? That whatever that metric is, however we quantify that. And based on that metric, the QA process should be built up or down to a level of rigor to maybe include reviews of multiple people or a single person, or some sort of QA process that says, all right, we have checked this in a line by line fashion to make sure that anomalous items either exist or don't exist, or it meets our release note criteria or something to that effect. Now that would be something that might be a little bit new. Some people might do that. that's that secure DevOps process of, dynamic and static scanning of code that gets checked in before it's run in a production environment, some sort of a QA process, scanning of containers in a programmatic fashion. Those are all things that exist. The QA process is kind of my own pet thing that I believe in, depending on that metric of scale for level of importance and potential attack significance, right? I think that's something that we should look into as far as, secure system development. But then moving beyond DevOps, we have things like the threat was injected into Orion and now it got pushed out into the world. Well, the customers on their end could have been using things like DNS security and protection, right? Like from a Cisco Umbrella type product or an open DNS product, where why are these systems in my environment that either don't need to be communicating with the internet or are now randomly or unexpectedly communicating with the internet to DNS locations that are abnormal, right? This is anomalous behavior for these systems or for these service accounts that are running in this environment, and they're communicating with these DNS names that are unfamiliar and unaware. And even if it wasn't programmatically shut down, those things would have come up to a console to be bubbled up to say, hey, this is flagged behavior. This is anomalous. We should look at this. Why are these systems communicating to these DNS names that are changing periodically throughout the day that are kind of nonsensical? That would have prevented this. And even making sure that you control outbound traffic and monitor outbound traffic from your network. Everybody's worried about inbound, but data exfiltration is significantly more damaging to an environment than just, let's say, a ransomware attack. A ransomware attack takes your documents and data, just locks it in a vault, and then leaves you a nasty note that says, pay me and I'll give it back. And then hopefully they'll give it back if you pay them. Sometimes they don't. But it behooves them to open it up because otherwise people will stop paying the ransom. But data exfiltration, or the theft of data, is significantly more damaging. And you can catch and control and monitor for data exfiltration if you're paying attention to data and communications that are leaving your network and logging where it's going to and what countries it's being sent to and what route it's taking to get there. If you can put in that level of intelligence, right? But at least what data is leaving your network and where it's being requested from or where it's being sent to. Why are you not looking at that? And so many people are like, oh yeah, I'm not paying attention to where I send data. It's just going out to the web. I don't care where it goes. Well, why not? You need to care, right? Depending on what government agency you work for. I know people that have worked for various government agencies in a digital or IT kind of capacity that say, yeah, we found out that we were sending traffic to this location from this system, and we immediately, somebody didn't even log into the server. They literally walked across the hall and grabbed the cable and pulled it out of the switch because that was the fastest way to shut it down. And yeah, it caused an outage, but things rerouted and, failed over and did what they were supposed to. And that was a better scenario than waiting for somebody to log into the system and shut it down. And then obviously there are other government agencies like these that aren't monitoring that traffic at all because they didn't even know that they were communicating with malicious attackers in a command and control type of situation. So those are just some examples, but those are the things that I had mentioned specifically for the CRN article.
So a lot of things that you're talking about, certainly we're focusing right now on the government side of the hack, but it also impacted a lot of regular companies, right? Large and small. So some of the things that you talk about seem to require relatively significant resources to do, or maybe it's just kind of how it feels. What are the type of things that are really within the reach of most Fortune 1000 style companies like we typically deal with? Like, is it a super heavy lift or super expensive to have the type of tools that are kind of programmatically, even if they're not shutting things down programmatically, at least analyzing all the data so that a big red alert sign goes off on someone's desk to try and take action? I'm just trying to get my arms around what sort of tools are available to people to prevent these things going forward within their own organizations.
Absolutely. So what you're talking about is, defining the scope of a cybersecurity program that is right-sized to an organization. That's really the crux of your question.
By the way, you said it much better than I did, but exactly.
So, scoping a cybersecurity program that is right-sized to an organization is part of my job. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it can be difficult. It is very data driven based on risk assessment and analysis for your organization, right? There's actually calculations that we can use to say, if your exposure is, X amount of dollars, then it's wise, or at least recommended, to spend X amount of money in terms of insurance, not actual insurance. I'm using that term loosely, right? To protect yourself and put in the, risk mitigating factors that equate to about X in order to provide protection to the organization because of the risk that you've identified in terms of dollars and cents. So there is a certain amount that can be quantifiable that way. But there's also a level of emotional interpretation, right? I mean, for example, I could do all of the data-driven analysis in the world and present that to a CIO or CEO who ultimately is responsible for the integrity of the business and the operation. And they could come back and say, yeah, that's all great and wonderful, but bottom line, I want you to do everything in your power to reduce the risk, and therefore we're going to take that number and we're going to double it, right? And so now we have this overinflated cybersecurity program. Or senior management could come back and say, listen, you've actually overstated the potential loss here, right? In actuality, if that happens, we really don't care because we have other business interests that would be able to, take over or kick in, and therefore this is really less important to us than the other. So it really kind of falls on senior management to make that decision. But you need people that understand cybersecurity and risk assessment and analysis and attack vectors and what is out there to kind of draw those conclusions. And so that's why I say it can be a little bit complicated. And I spend a lot of time working on risk assessments and trying to, explain those cases and metrics and data to senior management so that they can then make a decision and approve budgets and things like that. So the simple answer is there is no right answer for every organization of X size or of X revenue. There's no direct correlation. It really comes down to the individual and independent risk assessments for each application and environment and organization based on the defined criteria of senior management, and then also the types of data being processed and things like that. The simplest answer is cybersecurity isn't cheap. It's like buying better locks for your home and security cameras for your home. Are you going to suffer a home invasion? Hopefully not. But the simple fact of the matter is that in the cybersecurity world, you're significantly more likely to suffer some kind of a cyber-related attack than you are a home invasion. The common phrase that has been out there in the market from Cisco and McAfee, I think it was originally coined by the CEO of McAfee, a previous or prior CEO of McAfee at a conference, many years ago, was, there are two types of organizations, those that have been breached and those that don't know they have been breached. That's how pervasive cybersecurity attacks are. And with the COVID climate and everybody being online more and working remotely, that has just increased, right? And you can see that in every news report and every cybersecurity website on the internet. That is just going up exponentially. So what is justified? I don't know. Are there tools available to help you do the things that we're talking about? Absolutely. Are they expensive? Some of them are, and then some of them aren't. There is low-hanging fruit like DNS security and antivirus and other things like that they cost, right? No one's going to do it for free, but those are kind of at the lower end of the cost spectrum and, kind of puts that bare minimum level of protection in place. When you start getting into things like secure DevOps tools and automated scanning and policies and procedures even that, say, hey, you will do these things for a secure QA process of code review. Those are more operationally expensive because it may take people or investment in time to build out that level of automation to run those tests. So there's no simple answer to your question. And cybersecurity is expensive, but, it's like disaster recovery as well. Would you rather do the work up front and spend the money to protect yourself based on a valid risk assessment? Or would you rather just say, well, we didn't know what we didn't know, and then it happened, and then we end up in a situation like the SolarWinds Orion attack?
So moving on from SolarWinds, there's always been hacks, right? Going back to Experian, Target, any number of companies. The thing that's always interesting to me is that initially there is, this response that says, hey, there's been a breach, but we think it's only a few 100,000 of our customers. Again, big number that, feels like it should be bigger than it is, but Then usually a week later, 2 weeks later, it's like the number of records or customers that are impacted by these breaches seem to increase by an order of magnitude. So 300,000 becomes 3 million or more. So there's the part of detecting it before and taking preventative measures. But the other thing that's always just interesting to me is that it seems that it takes a long time to really try and understand what the impacts have been. And A, why is that? And then B, going back to what you said earlier, that you have to make these judgment calls as management of, for this type of data, we're going to accept that amount of risk. Once these breaches occur, how should companies think about kind of resetting what those risk trade-offs are? Because it always seems like it's probably worse than people think it is when they make that initial decision.
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
So number one,
there are no easy questions on this podcast, I'm telling you.
So, I mean, number one, if people are underestimating the level of risk to the organization when they're determining what protections to put in place, that is definitely a bad thing, and that can result in a lot of potential issues and additional risk, obviously, or residual risk, I guess is a better way to put it. The easiest solution to that is do not rely solely on an internal locus of perception for risk assessment in developing a cyber security program. Have independent assessments done. That's why they have internal and external auditing, right? For things like SOC compliance.
Tell people quickly what SOC is.
Sarbanes-Oxley compliance.
Oh, SOX. Okay, gotcha.
Sorry. And it was originally for financial reporting information, but given the fact that it's their digital assets and data, even non-public companies go out, and if they have data that they're hosting or they're providing IT services of some kind in some sort of a digital fashion, go out and try to get SOC 1, 2, and 3 certified. And there's different levels of SOC compliance. And in order to achieve and also maintain SOC compliance at levels 1, 2, 3, you have to have independent auditors come in and actually do an attestation and affirmation. So depending on what level you're at, sometimes it's just attestation that you have policies and procedures, and then at higher levels they're actually testing your procedures and your tooling and auditing and logging requirements to say that yes, we are following these policies, we update these policies regularly, and then we are actually taking these level of technical actions in the environment depending on what level. And you have to have independent auditors come out and do those things. That's part of the reason why independent outside auditors are required, is because it's not ethical to say, yeah, we are meeting all of these requirements to the outside world if you're the one saying that, because you're obviously going to skew the results in your favor. And the same goes for a risk assessment. So how do you prevent this kind of situation that you talked about, Glenn? Don't just rely on an internal risk assessment. Make sure that you bring in a third party, even at any level, right? Even whether they don't have to have any kind of special certifications even necessarily. But if they have people on the payroll that understand cybersecurity and NIST and CIS controls and what's relevant to various industries and types of applications and data, at least they have experience in those areas. Have them come in and give you a risk assessment and say, this is where we believe that you have strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for improvement.
So you mentioned in the CRN article that a lot of these companies already have plenty of cybersecurity solutions in place, but they're just not using them correctly. Could you elaborate on how a company uses these kind of tools incorrectly and how we're able to go in and diagnose that they're using them incorrectly and ameliorate that?
Sure. So it's not exactly, incorrect use might be a little bit of an overstatement. From my experience, I would say that it's usually underutilization, if anything. And what that means is they have tools, for example, antivirus or DNS security tools, but they're taking a set it and forget it mentality. Even firewalls, really, firewall rules and access control lists, port to port communications. It's the set it and forget it type of mentality. Yeah, we did it once and now it's good, in perpetuity. And maybe they check it every once a week, or that would actually once a week would be better than a lot of people. But it's just set it and forget it, and then they go back and check on it occasionally if something breaks or if they need to change something because a request comes into the environment. And that is not the kind of ethos that you need to take for a cybersecurity program. Cybersecurity needs to be ongoing every day in the forefront of everybody's life, not just of security experts, but everybody in IT and everybody in the business. And that's why we preach all this user awareness training for users now about, strong passwords and why it's important and what kind of attacks are out there, because it really is everybody's responsibility in an organization. So in terms of tooling, I would like to counsel people not necessarily about buying the wrong tools or not using their tools correctly. I'm sure that does happen, but it's really about underutilizing your tools because you took it seriously enough to buy the tool, but then you didn't actually understand the scope of what you were protecting or why you were protecting it and the threat landscape enough to put the right level of motivation of using the tool into your everyday life.
And some of that is that realization maybe doesn't happen until, the first breach that they're aware of. Yeah, I think the set it and forget it is an important point. Are some of the tools coming out today, because machine learning is everywhere, are there certain tools that are kind of building in automatic adaptive methods so that it's learning and maybe you don't need to have the human intervention to go in? Still may be useful to look every quarter, every so often, whatever. But where some of those things can be automated to keep the level of security as high as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. CrowdStrike, Cisco. I'm just naming two off the top of my head, but there are a number of secure perimeter device companies, right? Firewalls, IDS, IPS, web application firewalls, antivirus programs, DNS security programs, all kinds of things that actually do use machine learning and, quote unquote, artificial intelligence type of algorithms to look for trends in user behavior and then anomalous system and user behavior to throw flags, right? But listen, it's still a program at the end of the day, okay? And even in artificial intelligence, we still have to check artificial intelligence programs to ensure that they are throwing out results that meet reasonable expectations, right? There are programs that are written that are called machine learning aware or artificially intelligent that still throw out results that do not meet facets of acceptable reality, right? Like that just doesn't make sense, right? That value is greater than the weight of the earth. It can't possibly be that value. Let's go back and figure out what happened, because they're made by people. So is it good to have those things? Does it give you an edge? Sure, especially if it's a very small scope, like what a user does on the internet over the course of several months and weeks, and then all of a sudden the person does something random, like access a site that's in China for weapons of mass destruction, or I'm just making this up, right? But yeah, absolutely, that's anomalous behavior. Let's throw a flag on that, okay? But there's no solution that's going to be all encompassing to that end. You have, and that's why every good security expert with their salt that's gone through any kind of training knows about a defense in depth type of strategy. You protect the edge of the network, you protect the each individual endpoint of the network, you run vulnerability scans, you have antivirus, you have change control procedures and policies that make sure that your environment is being configured to a level of acceptable standards, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, they are out there, but it's not a foolproof solution.
So I'm just curious. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but it's fascinating to me. It sounds like this the SolarWinds hack was traveling through all these 18,000 systems since like last March 2020. So do you know what it was that finally tipped people off that there was a problem?
I don't know exactly what the initial fact finding was that said, "Ooh, hey, this happened and now we've got an issue." I do know that there were several articles about, Microsoft being kind of one of the front runners in terms of raising red flags that this issue had come from a SolarWinds patch that was, let loose in the environment. But as far as the individual incident or the series of incidents on what dates, I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, Steve, I think what I heard is that there was an error message that came up on someone's screen that instead of saying no, it said yet. So that was the tip off that the Russians were involved.
It's always bad grammar is the tip off. It's just so amazing. And they're saying that the scale of the hack keeps growing. It just seems like there's not a lot of coverage around like how much of this hack is contained or.
I would go as far, and I know this sounds very conspiracy theory-esque, but let's just say I have it on relatively reliable information and sources that there are a number of things in terms of types of attacks and what is out there in the wild today that are most likely not being disclosed to the public because it would cause mass panic. And while this kind of potentially teeters on that boundary, given the agencies, the federal agencies and things that, and even the businesses that were impacted in their size and scale, I'm not shocked, to be honest.
All right. Well, we don't need to send people into a panic, I think.
Here's a very practical piece of information that is telling, but I don't think people really, they don't take it to its furthest possible conclusion as to why. But why is the cybersecurity community and businesses like Microsoft and others, why are they moving away from passwords and really pushing multiple factors of authentication that include also biometrics? I mean, we've been able to do biometric authentication for many, 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 many years. I don't know if you guys remember the first set of laptops that started coming out with fingerprint scanners that just nobody ever used, right? At least not in the public world.
ThinkPads.
Yeah, right. I mean, they just nobody used them. They were just there, and it was like, that's so dumb. It was that little slit that was on your laptop keyboard or your external keyboard that came with your PC or whatever. But now all of a sudden, we've got facial recognition on iPhones, and even Windows is doing it, and then now there's pins, and it's because, come on, why would we start moving away from passwords? Because passwords by themselves are no longer a valid security mechanism. So now you minimally have to have 2 to 3 authentication mechanisms that belong to you on your person that are almost irrefutable, all right? Like a fingerprint or facial ID or voice recognition, as well as a PIN number and a password and a text message or other type of one-time password, just in order to be able to access a terminal. And everybody's like, nobody's talking about, well, why are we doing all of this? Users are just accepting it like, oh my gosh, we have so much security, but they're not thinking about why companies and why software providers and application providers are making people do this. It's because passwords are no longer a valid security mechanism. Think about what that means. How many things out there in the wild on the internet that you own and consume on a daily basis that just have a password? So can you imagine what a press release that said, hey guys, passwords by themselves, as well as even maybe one-time passwords, are no longer a valid security mechanism to secure data? People would freak out.
Yeah, you would think so. But at the same time, like, what was it, like 2 or 3 years ago? Like NIST came out saying that, SMS for, like second factor is insane because SMS, de facto is not secure. So the fact that that's what you're using as your second factor is really not a good method, but still it's what people do primarily. Like so many companies are still using SMS.
Yeah, I agree. And part of the reason that that's happening, right, is because I feel very confident that there is a large amount of information in terms of the types of attacks and mechanisms to circumvent common security controls like passwords and SMS one-time password authentication that's not being released to the public. They're building in the security controls and the guidelines and recommendations to start mitigating things, right? And government agencies are being asked to do it with more immediacy. But as terms of the general public, it's taking a longer time to filter down. It's just being kind of pushed into the cybersecurity world and realm in terms of compensating controls, as opposed to, hey, we all have to do this because there's a major problem, right? Those are two very different things. Your world is blown right now, right? You're thinking about how many passwords you got to go change and enable at least multi-factor authentication on different accounts. That's
I was thinking that. That's funny. I was Let's talk about specific solutions that we offer. Let's get into a little bit of a commercial here. So what does a Nextnet offer in terms of security programs?
Yeah, sure. So we do have specific professional services engagements, right? And kickstarts that are high intensity professional services consulting engagements with a very specific outcome that are very organized into components with, key outcomes and deliverables that we try to execute on a very, very fast timeline that are specifically focused and tailored to cybersecurity. One of them is a CIS controls gap assessment, where we take the Center for Internet Security common controls that, minimally most organizations require just to have some level of control over their environment, that, hey, which ones are you doing? Which ones are you not doing? And then does that match either a risk assessment or your interpretation of your risk for your environment? We can also do risk assessments that are much more like a business impact analysis type scenario for an organization, and give them that quantitative and qualitative guidance and recommendations and fact finding for their organization to then get senior leadership to make a decision, or at least have an understanding of IT and business risk combined, so that they can, create budgets and allocate staff and things like that for a cybersecurity program based on their business needs. But then also it's built into our other programs and professional services as well. Like, let's say IT modernization, right? We look at everything from application development to network and infrastructure. We also include cybersecurity, and hey, you have PCI requirements, you have FERPA requirements. Pick a topic, or HIPAA and public health information requirements. So because of this, when we go through and do that assessment, we give you at least a glimpse into, well, hey, we know for a fact that there are common controls that you guys are not implementing. So yeah, we run the range, and then we, of course, as part of our ongoing managed services and things like that, we also have a 24/7 SOC and SIM service that we try to offer at to give the SOC and SIM is traditionally something that's relatively complex and difficult and expensive to set up for small businesses, but it provides a tremendous amount of logging, auditing, and eyes on glass type of service that, really give you a better level of control of data incoming and data outgoing, and then what is happening inside of the environment on a day-to-day, user by user, system by system basis. And we can offer that to customers at a low monthly cost, whether they be small business or all the way up through global enterprise.
And what are the most typical gaps that you see?
Oh, that's almost impossible.
It's impossible.
It runs the gambit. There are companies, there are small businesses out there that have a person with cybersecurity experience on staff, and they have a tremendous cybersecurity program with, when you put it in terms of their level of business risk, right? And the things that they've implemented to try and control their environment. And then there are, on the other side of that coin, there are organizations that will remain nameless that, they can't even get people to change passwords on a regular basis to put in a minimal level of security risk protection. I would say the biggest and most concerning thing that I see pervasively is the use and consumption of antivirus programs that encourage a set it and forget it type of mentality, right? Let's install it, let's deploy it, let's roll it out, let's make sure it stays updated. Hopefully, even that sometimes gets missed. But then let's never look at it again, right? And if a user calls in and says they got an alert that their antivirus picked something up or quarantined something or removed something, then we'll take action. You would never do that for any mission critical application. If a user sees it first, you would say that your network operations or your site readiness engineers or your application engineers failed because you have a mission critical service or user or whatever that knew they had a problem before you did, and you control the system. You would consider that a fail. So why is it okay for your antivirus? Shouldn't all of those things be coming back to a central console that immediately notifies and a person with the right level of skills and intelligence to be able to take action at the same time or almost at the same time that the user would experience an issue or before the user would experience an issue? That just seems to be common sense to me. But that level of set it and forget it for local antivirus and system level antivirus or host-based intrusion protection and detection systems is probably the most pervasive thing that I see.
My mind is still blown by the fact that out of 18,000 clients, none of them had a way to detect that there was outgoing data that they weren't aware of. So where do you see security going? We always like to end with a look to the future. Are you an optimist? Are you a pessimist? Which way do you lean?
Well, I mean, if you're asking me, do I think that cyber attacks and threats are ever going to be thwarted to the point where it begins to become a non-issue? Absolutely not. As long as we have information that's stored digitally, that is being transferred over a publicly accessible communication mechanism like the internet, you are going to have cyber attacks. There are always going to be people out there that are going to try and game the system or scheme the system. Not to mention, I mean, some of these people just do this for fun, guys. They're not necessarily doing it because they actually want to be malicious necessarily. They're doing it because they can, right? Script kiddies and things like that. These aren't hardened criminals, right? If these people end up going to jail, they're going to be in a very rude awakening, because the chances are is that they're probably dressed like a hipster and they drink coffee that costs $10 and they can't pronounce it because it's got half French, half English, half Italian, and 17 words in the name. And if they go to prison, they're going to end up being a pancake. They're just script kiddies that sit around and they understand coding, and they understand how to scan networks and look for things, and they understand math-based security in some cases, and they're just doing this because they can. So no, I would not say that I'm an optimist if I didn't give it away by everything that I responded with.
Well, that's great.
That's absolutely not great.
Really?
But
I was feeling pretty good. Well, Dave, is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you want to make sure that we address?
The biggest things to remember are, we all buy health insurance and car insurance, and we pay for disaster recovery, right? Because we know that things can happen. This is an unfortunate kind of area that I think openly acknowledges that if people can do something bad, they will, right? Extortion and which, ransomware is bad. Let's be real, right? You're extorting money from someone to get paid for, holding their data hostage, their users hostage, their business hostage. Theft of data, right? Stealing people's data and posting it on the internet so that it can be used against them and in some fashion, whether you're trying to do it maliciously or not, but it ends up being used in a malicious fashion, still makes you culpable. And so because that is the state of play, okay, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, unless somebody's aware of something that I'm not, in terms of the human condition. This is the world we live in, and therefore you need to do risk assessments, and you need to understand the threats that are out there to the best of your ability, which means you need to have somebody who is well versed in the cybersecurity world help you understand where your potential attacks are and your weaknesses are, and what you need to try and do to protect yourself at a minimum viable level, and then go from there. And I hate to say it, but even then, there is no guarantee that people aren't going to find a way around and breach you. There is no guarantee that a system admin isn't going to do something that you don't want them to do, and it's not going to cause an issue. All you can do is do the best that you possibly can to protect yourself, and leverage the tools and the expertise in the industry to provide the right level of safety to your organization. I think that's the biggest takeaway. But you have to do it, right? And these companies and these departments and these agencies, based on the facts that we do know about this SolarWinds attack, I don't even believe that they did the minimally viable tasks or put in the minimum viable controls that they needed to prevent something as simple as this.
That's crazy. Glenn, anything you want to add here closing up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up. It was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Hopefully it gives a lot of people things to think about. I mean, I know that Dave and I, we've worked on a couple of clients together, and Dave, I think you've probably seen on most of your engagements that there's significant room for improvement. So it should be something definitely on everyone's mind who's even tangentially related to security. Because at the end of the day, it impacts the viability of the companies that we work in. So everyone needs to be vigilant.
That's right. If our clients can't survive, then that's not helpful for us either. Well, thanks, guys, for joining me today. This was a great discussion. Really appreciate it. I feel pretty lousy, but that's all right. Just want to also add that no chickens were harmed in the making of this podcast. And I think that's all I got.
By the way, I was going to say that in your chicken analogy at the beginning, I don't think that it's so much that that giving them the feed would kill the chickens. I think that the analogy is more that it would allow mind control of the chickens so that they turn on you and your family. Sort of like how the turkeys that survived the drop during the WKRP promotion seem to self-organize and kind of go after Mr. Carlson.
It always comes around to the WKRP Thanksgiving episode.
Hey guys, I got a jet.
All right, Dave.
Thanks.
You know what though? It does seem like it's not just that you're putting poison in the food, but that the poison actually somehow self-propagates and becomes more poison. Right? Like it's really awful. I still don't understand how they eventually found out and what it was that tipped them off, and like how all of these 18,000 companies and organizations could have let this happen without knowing, and how little they're talking about it. And like they don't know what they're doing. They don't even know what the thing is doing. Have they stopped it? Is it still doing what it was doing?
From what I understood is that if they didn't do this patch to get rid of it, they basically had to turn everything off until that patch was implemented.
Also, there's a patch.
In one of the articles I read earlier today, it looks like there's some sort of patch that the government said, basically gave them to the end of the year to implement.
You mean last year? The end of last year?
Yeah, the end of 2020.
Okay, all right. We're all patched. We're all fine. Until they look at the patch and then they figure out how to get around the patch.
As a leading technology consultancy and reseller, Anexinet helps clients provide a complete digital experience for customers, employees, and end users. We accomplish this through our holistic approach, which encompasses all aspects of today's digital journey, end-to-end. Anexinet partners with top technology vendors like HPE to offer products and services that enhance the digital experience across customer engagement, enterprise mobility, cloud and hybrid IT, and analytics. Because great digital experiences rely on the smooth operation of all interconnected elements. From strategy through execution, we deliver custom multi-channel applications, including web, mobile, chat, and voice. With self-service apps for customer loyalty and enterprise apps that streamline internal processes, now you can reimagine legacy applications to propel your business forward. Anexinet also helps you embrace modern cloud and hybrid IT infrastructure to provide a seamless experience at every touchpoint, empowering you to recover quickly from disaster, scale to meet demand, and automate systems for perfect performance 24/7. And to maximize your competitive advantage, we ensure you always deliver the best experience possible by continuously honing your digital solutions through data-driven insights. So, how do you know if your business has what it takes to provide the complete digital experience? One that sets you apart, maintains competitive edge, and turns users into passionate fans? Simple. Just give us a call. Together, we can deepen engagement and make every digital experience remarkable.